So what am I doing, Russ? I put my best foot forward here for you, bud. I really have. I don't know what else to do to make you understand the impact of what's happening here. Did we talk?
I want to minimize the impact on my wife.
So do I.
So how do we do that?
Well, we start by telling the truth.
Okay.
Okay. So where is she?
Get a map.
If you're a fan of true crime, there's a very good chance you've seen the interrogation of Colonel Russell Williams before, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it's the best. A bold statement, but a rather unimpeachable one as far as this channel is concerned. A fair few interrogations have interesting moments within them, but somewhere in the range of 80% of their contents is about as exciting as watching paint dry. The albeit significantly redacted 2.5-hour interrogation of Colonel Williams, however, is gripping in one way or another for just about its entire duration, including periods of sometimes more than a minute where he just sits in his chair, breathing and thinking, probably as intensely as he ever has in his entire life. The second reason the footage is of such high profile is that Williams is among the most horrifying and depraved criminals in Canada's recent history. Though technically not a serial killer, as he murdered 2 people, whereas most law enforcement organizations require a body count of 3 to qualify for that specific designation. This really is just a matter of semantics, as the violent pattern he was rapidly developing makes it all but certain he would have killed again had he not been caught when he was. So serial killer is what this video will be classifying him as. More significant than body count, however, the wanton cruelty of his crimes, juxtaposed with his exceptionally high standing in society and the spotless personal history that earned him said standing, is what truly etched Williams into the collective psyche of a nation and crime watchers across the world. Which brings us to a central question of this video.
Why do you think these things happen? Have you spent much time thinking about that?
About why?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know the answers. And I'm pretty sure the answers don't matter.
When it comes to the fate of Russell Williams, and much more importantly, his victims, it's true that the answers as to why he did the things he did don't matter. But that doesn't change it from being a fascinating question. Because beyond his exceptionally high standing, there are several ways in which he does not fit the mold of a typical serial killer. To give you an idea of what we mean, and to fill in those of you who haven't happened to stumble upon today's subject before, we'll give you a brief primer on the background and criminal career of Colonel Russell Williams. He was born in England in 1963 to parents Christine and Cedric Williams, who immigrated to Canada with Russell and his younger brother Harvey in 1968. Not long after resettling, Christine and Cedric divorced under circumstances that could be described as less than amicable, but not so much so that they really warrant delving into in great detail. Aside from being a child of divorce at the age of 6, Russell's upbringing can be fairly described as stable. His mother remarried to a man named Jerry Sovka, who he had by all accounts a healthy relationship with, while also remaining close to his biological father. No red flags or developmental issues were ever noted during his childhood. When he reached adulthood, Williams studied economics and political science at the University of Toronto Scarborough, earning a Bachelor of Arts. At university, Williams exhibited a few noteworthy personality traits. One that would prove to be significant to his ultimate career path as a military man was a need for order and tidiness so chronic that it could be argued to fall on the spectrum of obsessive-compulsive disorders, setting up and rigorously enforcing a roster of chores for him and his roommates to ensure communal living spaces stayed in immaculate condition at all times. In contrast to this stuffy quality, however, Williams also had a mischievous streak. He was a big fan of pranks, like jumping out of a roommate's closet to scare them, for instance, sometimes lying in wait for hours in order to execute the gag, a level of discipline that seemed quirky at the time, but will become haunting in light of the modus operandi he will go on to develop later in life. In terms of dating, he had one known girlfriend in college who he was said to be enamored with, but some accounts suggest the level of affection in the relationship was not exactly reciprocal, and the woman in question broke up with Williams after a relatively short period of courtship. Friends recall him taking it very hard. Make of that what you will, but ultimately no violence or crimes of any sort can be attributed to Williams during his college years. He joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1987 at the age of 24. Williams was never placed in a role that had him see combat, so post-traumatic stress won't be entering the equation at any point. In 1991, he married Mary Elizabeth Harriman, the second woman he is known to have ever had a romantic relationship with. The couple were known to be very private, but nothing has ever come to light to suggest their marriage was anything less than stable. They had no children, but were known to express a degree of affection toward their cat Curio that resembled the sort of love a parent has for their child. Meanwhile, the combination of William's natural intelligence and extremely disciplined and regimented personality saw him rise ranks in the Canadian Armed Forces at breakneck speed. At 27, he was a well-regarded captain and skilled pilot. So much so that he was made responsible for flying dignitaries, including the Prime Minister of Canada and the Queen of England. By 1999, he was promoted to Major at the age of 36, and then Lieutenant Colonel in 2004 at the age of 41. In 2007, at the age of 44, Williams broke into his neighbour's house while they were away and took 25 photos of himself in the room of a 12-year-old girl that depicted him naked and pleasuring himself on the girl's underwear. He took 6 pieces of her underwear with him, but the family did not notice any sign of an intruder. This is the first known instance of Williams ever committing any crime. By 2009, he was made full colonel at the age of 45 and sworn in as wing commander of Canada's busiest Air Force base, CFB Trenton in Trenton, Ontario. Needless to say, this was a very important and demanding position. Not demanding enough, however, to interfere with the colonel's seemingly newfound proclivities. In the time between and following his ghastly activities in his neighbour's home and his coveted promotion, Williams committed dozens of additional break-ins and underwear burglaries in the same neighbourhood in the municipality of Tweed. Tweed was the location of a small cottage property owned by the Williamses, serving as a secondary property in closer proximity to the military base than their main house in Orleans, Ottawa, where Russell Williams soon began committing similar nighttime break-ins as well. His targets were exclusively female, with ages ranging from pre-adolescence to mid-40s. As in the first instance, his perverse heists were often so discreet that his victims did not even realize a break-in had taken place. But soon things began to escalate. On one occasion, he pleasured himself on a photo of one of his victims and left it out in plain sight. On another, he typed a message on a computer bragging about his intrusion. And on September 17, 2009, he entered a home in Tweed while his target was inside. The 20-year-old, known only as Jane Doe, was sound asleep. Williams woke and subdued her before using pillowcases to bind her to a chair and blind her. Without going into too much detail, she was sexually assaulted for about 2 hours. Williams then told her to count aloud to 300 while he made his escape. The woman's infant daughter slept in the next room for the duration of the incident. Williams' next violent assault took place only 2 weeks later on September 30th, again in Tweed and only 3 doors down from his home. The victim was a 46-year-old woman named Laurie Massicott. Again, without going into too much detail, the incident was very similar to Jane Doe. Bound, blinded, assaulted, then Williams left. And less than 2 months after that, on November 23rd, things escalated significantly yet again when Williams broke into the home of 37-year-old Corporal Marie-France Como, a servicewoman stationed at the same base of which Williams was in command. Como's residence was much further from Williams' Tweed cottage and closer to the military base than any of the previous break-ins, suggesting evading capture was beginning to instill a certain arrogance in him. This is further evidenced by the fact that Williams broke into the house before Marie-France went to bed, opting to hide in the basement. Marie-France wound up discovering him, and a struggle ensued. Williams overpowered her, and like the previous 2 incidents, she was bound, blinded, and assaulted for hours. Unlike the previous incidents, this one ended in murder, with Williams suffocating Marie-France with duct tape. He attended work, on time, a matter of hours later. No one observed anything unusual about the Colonel's demeanour during the day. Then on January 28, 2010, Williams broke into the home of 27-year-old Jessica Lloyd. Lloyd's ordeal was particularly harrowing, with Williams seeing fit to transport her still bound and blindfolded to his Tweed cottage, hours into the assault early in the AMs. He called in sick to work that morning. Jessica Lloyd's nightmare lasted for about 19 hours before Williams killed her, striking her in the back of the head before strangling her. The disappearance of the universally liked Jessica Lloyd sent a shockwave through the community, and police, rightly suspecting that the seeming abduction may be connected to the murder of Marie-France Como and assaults of Jane Doe and Laurie Massicott, went into overdrive trying to identify a suspect. Fortunately, they had something to work with. Lloyd's likely abductor had left tyre tracks in the snow near a cornfield adjacent to her residence, and 2 people had spotted an SUV parked around that area the night before Jessica went missing. Police subsequently set up a roadblock near Lloyd's Belleville home on February 4th, stopping any vehicle that looked similar to the description of the SUV, and who should pull up shortly after 7 p.m. but the eminently respected Colonel Russell Williams, heading home from work in his Nissan Pathfinder, sporting exactly the make of tyres they were looking for. The degree to which the Colonel's status helped him evade suspicion is difficult to overstate, and is perhaps best illustrated by the fact that even at this point, the officer responsible for taking Williams' tyre measurements, knowing who Williams was, debated with his colleagues for a moment whether it was worth their time investigating him. Fortunately, they convinced him his reservations were misguided, and Williams was immediately placed under surveillance. A few days later, on the afternoon of Sunday, February 7th, Colonel Russell Williams received a phone call from Detective Sergeant Jim Smith, asking if he would be willing to pay a visit to the station downtown for an interview to assist in the investigation of Jessica Lloyd's disappearance. Having basically no choice, Williams agreed, resulting in the famous interrogation we can now look at in more depth.
You just have to see the Russell.
The guy I was speaking with on whatever night that was Russ as well.
Oh, yeah.
And he took every number I had.
Yeah, no, they were doing some pretty thorough interviews that night. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I was
All right.
glad to see it.
Russell Williams wasn't actually glad to see the blockade, obviously, and he showed that at the time by trying to pull rank, attempting to bypass the check by telling the officers he was in a rush to get home to look after his sick child. Needless to say, when investigators discovered Williams had no children, their suspicions were raised considerably.
I'm just going to move your gloves here. That's a little microphone, just to make sure there's nice and clear. You ever been interviewed by the police in a room like this before? Or?
I've never been interviewed like this.
Oh, no?
When this interview was eventually played in court, Williams' now infamous smirk at the camera and the arrogance that it encapsulated drew gasps from the gallery. But he is not as self-assured as he is putting on. We know this because as soon as he finished his phone call with Smith, he rushed to hide 2 500GB hard drives in the ceiling of his basement. The hard drives contained approximately 3,000 images and videos documenting his crimes, including those perpetrated on Marie-France Como and Jessica Lloyd. In fact, his house in Orleans was brimming with similarly damning evidence that was bound to be unearthed by even the most cursory of police searches. Evidence he had absolutely no way of concealing or disposing of before making the trip downtown. So don't let appearances fool you. Russell Williams must already be terrified. This is conceivably why he's seen chewing gum for the first hour and a half or so of the interview, as it's a relatively common mechanism for stress relief.
Okay.
No,
Let's get this set up here.
I guess the closest to interview by NIS for top secret clearance.
Oh, yeah? All right. Well, again, Russell, I appreciate you coming in.
Jim Smith's performance in this interrogation has been rightfully lauded as masterful, and that small moment was a great example of how masterful performances are often subtle. There's a bit of a tightrope he has to walk throughout this process. He doesn't want to cast himself as an adversary, as he needs to build as much rapport and trust as possible to avoid Williams clamming up, but not so much so as to set up a dynamic where the high-ranking colonel sees him as a peer, or worse yet, a sort of spiritual subordinate. So when Williams makes a rather ham-fisted attempt to incorporate his high standing into the conversation, by casually mentioning he's been interviewed for top-secret clearance, Smith is at a bit of an impasse. It wouldn't be a good move to completely ignore the statement, as that could be read as borderline hostile, but you certainly wouldn't want to pick up on that thread for any amount of time to build rapport, as any time spent talking about William's status is liable to make him feel as if it's of any significance in this room, and gives him more license to throw his weight around or otherwise be anything less than 100% cooperative. So what Smith does is acknowledge the statement, but only just barely so as not to be perceived as rude, with 2 words, "Oh yeah?" and then moves on to the topic at hand within 2 seconds of giving the non-engaging response, so Williams doesn't have enough space to elaborate any further on the matter.
I guess the closest to interview by NIS for top secret clearance.
Oh, yeah? All right. Well, again, Russell, I appreciate you coming in. An investigation like this, I mean, I'm sure you can appreciate it's been big news, especially down Belleville way. And, you know, obviously our approach to cases like this is that we don't give up on somebody being alive until we get evidence that they're not. So because of that, we're treating Jessica's case as an emergent situation, obviously.
Yeah.
So we're fast forwarding things that we might normally take our time with, and that's why we're here on a Sunday afternoon.
Sure.
So again, I appreciate it.
No
Smith sets a non-hostile tone for the interview, offering Williams coffee, which he accepts, though sort of interestingly opts to leave to the side for once he's done chewing his piece of gum.
I have a simple rule when I talk to people. It's I'm sure you're the same way. I treat everybody with respect. I don't ask if they do the same for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by going through what your rights are, okay? Just like everybody else, okay? Have you ever been read your rights before?
No.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen it on TV a whole bunch of times, but that's usually the American version, so I'll go over with you briefly, okay?
We've explained how Canadians' rights when it comes to being interviewed by the police work on this channel before. The short version is unlike Miranda rights in the US. You don't actually have the right to refuse to be questioned without a lawyer, but you do have the right to consult with one who will invariably tell you not to say anything. Conventional wisdom states not talking to the police is the best play 100% of the time. With that said, if there was a case where trying to talk yourself out of trouble was the best strategy, there's an argument to be made that this is it. There's already sufficient evidence to issue a search warrant on Williams' house at this point, so he's done no matter what. But he doesn't know that. Not for sure, at least. What he will know for sure is if the commander of CFB Trenton refuses to fully cooperate with an active investigation of this nature, he will immediately be subjected to a level of scrutiny that is bound to reveal him. So from William's perspective, if he is able to assuage suspicion through this conversation, even just enough to buy himself a day or two to destroy as much evidence as he can, then there could be an ever so remote chance of finding a road out of this.
I want to explain to you exactly what's going on here, okay? Jessica Lloyd is is one of 4 cases that we're currently investigating. Okay, and essentially what's happened is over the past about 4 or 5 months, there have been 4 occurrences that, like I said, that we're looking into. 2 of those occurrences occurred in September of 2009, and very briefly, they were up in the Tweed area. They involved somebody entering 2 different women's houses in the evening hours and committing sexual acts. Okay. In November of 2009, a young lady by the name of Marie-France Como.
My people.
Was found murdered in her home in Brighton. And we believe that there was a sexual component to that crime as well. And then most recently we have Jessica Lloyd's disappearance. Okay, so essentially when you're looking at those kind of crimes, we're looking at a number of different potential criminal charges. All right, we're looking at issues all the way from the most serious one, which is first-degree murder, kidnapping, sexual assault, break and enter with intent to commit sexual assault, forcible confinement. Okay. And so what I want to make sure you understand, and this is what we've been doing with everybody we've been talking to, is that clearly when we find out who's responsible for one or all of those crimes, they could be charged with one or all of those offenses, okay, whether it's you or whether it's anybody else, all right? And that's why it's important that we make sure that people understand what they have to do and what they don't have to do when they're talking to us, okay? So as I said before, any point today you feel the need, you want to speak to a lawyer, you let me know, and we can take you to a room where you can do that in private, okay? Do you have your own lawyer?
I have a realty lawyer, but no, I don't have a lawyer.
All right. If at any point you want to make that call and you don't know who to call, we have a phone list of lawyers that are available to give you advice free of charge right over the phone. Okay. So again, if at any point today you want to take advantage of that, you just let me know.
Sure.
Is there any reason you want to call a lawyer now?
Nope.
Okay. A couple other fairly simple and straightforward things that you probably understand, but again, we go over them to make sure everybody's clear, is that you don't have to speak to me today, okay? And the reason for that is because the law considers me to be what we refer to as a person of authority, okay? Probably similar to what you may be considered to be on the base. And because of that, I can be compelled to appear before any judge in the country, basically, to account for what takes place here today between you and I, okay?
Like with that just pleasant enough brush off we saw earlier, what Detective Smith did there was both subtle and masterful. What nicer way to say you're not the authority figure here, I am, than by pointing out that fact just to make sure the subject is fully aware of their rights and doesn't have to say anything they don't want to.
So,
understood. These first 2 attacks happened not that far from my place in Tweed. Well, the second one did. We didn't even know the first one had happened, but I understand that was reasonably close as well. But the second one was very close.
And essentially, Russell, in a nutshell, that's what we wanted to talk to you about. Okay, those 4 cases are of concern to us, and you know, you've kind of almost hit the nail on the head about some of our issues that kind of make us want to talk to Russell Williams. Okay, because essentially there was a connection between you and all 4 of those cases. Would you agree? Geographically,
and then I guess I drive past. Yes, I would have to say there's a connection. Yeah.
The approach of asking Williams if he agrees the factors Smith has just gone over create a connection to him, rather than simply asserting it, speaks to something that makes this interrogation very different from most others you'll see. The broader interrogation method that Smith is largely drawing from in his approach is not actually an interrogation method at all. It's called motivational interviewing, a school of counselling that's applied in many contexts, most notably addiction treatment. The general approach of motivational interviewing is to put more of an emphasis on conversation than confrontation. With the example of an addict, for instance, rather than stress upon them the damage they're doing to their lives, you would ask questions designed to bring them closer to reckoning with that themselves as they answer. The thinking goes that a lasting commitment to change is far more likely to occur if it comes from within. Forensic professionals such as Smith and those consulting with him in his approach to Williams believe the same holds true for confessions.
Yeah, and that's why, I'll be quite frank with you, that's why things kind of evolved when the officers talked to you on Thursday night.
Okay.
We kind of went from there, because when I think you discussed with them the fact that you were a colonel at the base.
I was in uniform at the time, so.
Yeah, so pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, then the connection with Miss Como was made. And I believe you're a door or two down from one of those two incidents in Tweed.
3 doors down, yeah.
Yeah.
Very close, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So those are some of the issues we wanted to discuss with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So just getting back to these 4 incidents that we're talking about, maybe you could just give me a little bit of history as to your arrival in the base in Trenton. When did you start working there?
Friday on the day, I was...
Just shy of 15 minutes into the interview, Williams will already be feeling the heat. It will have certainly occurred to him before now that he won't be able to produce a verifiable alibi for any of the incidents. But being asked to walk Smith through his movements in and around the time that Jessica Lloyd went missing will really be bringing that fact home for him.
Friday on the day, I was at home most of the time. Most of the day I had a sort of a stomach flu.
Okay. In Ottawa or Tweed?
In Tweed.
In Tweed? Okay.
Yeah.
So we backtrack then.
Smith says he wants to backtrack, but then appears to realise the importance of what Williams just said, so he quickly changes course to confirm a very important fact before going backwards in the timeline.
So,
all day Friday, you're at home.
Yeah.
And then what time do you leave to go to the base to sleep there on the Friday night?
Not sure. Probably just, went in for just before bed. So I probably left Tweed at between 8 and 9 or so.
Okay.
So Williams' location and movements are completely unaccounted for from the evening that Jessica was last seen alive until the following evening, once it had become apparent she had disappeared.
Do you remember what time you left the base that night?
I don't remember anything peculiar, so I would say, I don't know, probably 7 to 9, somewhere in that range.
Okay. And that's when you left?
Left the base, yeah.
And what
That's a 45-minute transit.
45 minutes home?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to walk you through November, but I'm going to take you to a date that's probably pretty fresh in your mind, the day that Marie-France Como.
Yeah.
If you keep an eye on the lower left side of the screen, you'll see some self-soothing begin to emerge in Williams' body language as he discusses the time around Marie-France Como's death.
Do you remember how you found out?
I do. Yeah, I was sent an email. Well, as soon as the ops staff and the base learned, they told me.
Okay.
So I got an email. I can't remember if it was late at night or early in the morning. It was certainly, I saw it, I want to say first thing in the morning, because I had just come back from Ottawa. I was in Ottawa for a set of meetings on one of the days. I can't remember what day of the week we're talking about, but yeah, no, I mean, obviously when your people gets killed, it gets your attention. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I very much remember that coming in.
And how did you know Marie-France Como?
I'd only met her once. She was on a crew I was on just after I got to the base.
Okay.
While there's nothing to suggest that Marie-France and Williams had what you'd call a close relationship, he's still downplaying their level of familiarity here. Not long after receiving an email informing him of her passing, he actually took the time to make an edit to a press release that was set to go out from the base concerning the development. In it, she was named as Marie Como. He corrected her first name to the full hyphenated Marie-France, a correction that in other circumstances would be touching, but in this one is stomach-churning due to this piece of background. Several weeks before he brutally murdered her, in a phone conversation with one of his few close friends, Williams mentioned a nice woman under his command who had been giving him pointers on his French. The friend is sure it was Marie-France that Williams was referring to, as he specifically remembers asking if the pronunciation of her surname was the same as the Canadian city Baie-Comeau.
So if we were to do a similar investigation in your background, is there anything you can think of that anybody may have misinterpreted, or anything in your history that somebody might say Russell Williams
Absolutely.
did this?
No.
Okay.
Be very boring.
What's that?
It'll be very boring.
All right, because essentially that's what I'm looking at. Is it? You seem like a very intelligent person, and I think you can see how a surprise like that would certainly set off some alarm bells in our investigation, right? Okay. So the next thing we need to cover off is, I'll just ask you this straight out. Given the types of crimes we're investigating, do you get much chance to watch television shows, CSI, things like that?
I do watch, I prefer Law and Order, but I do watch CSI occasionally, yes.
Okay. So you have an idea of, obviously, the forensic capabilities, things like that are out there. What would you be willing to give me today to help me move past you in this investigation?
What do you need?
Well, would you be willing to supply things like fingerprints, blood samples,
Sure.
things like that?
Yeah.
Okay. Footwear impressions?
Yeah.
Moments like this highlight just how advantageous it is to give a suspect as little of a window of time as possible between telling them you want to speak to them and actually getting them into the room. During the time Williams was hurriedly stashing those repulsive hard drives in his basement ceiling, he never had the thought to change into different footwear than he was wearing on the night he broke into Jessica Lloyd's house. Like Smith stated a moment ago, Russell Williams is very intelligent, as well as pathologically detail-oriented. It's highly doubtful such an oversight would have occurred had he been given much more than an hour or so to get his thoughts together.
Okay, all right. I think that's what we're gonna ask you to do.
Okay.
All right.
So Russell Williams provides his blood, fingerprints and boot impressions. And while he and Smith are waiting, we get another masterclass lesson in how to placate a person just enough to come across as courteous but not subservient.
Can I assume you're going to be discreet?
It's possible. Yeah.
Because, this would have a very significant impact on the base if they thought you thought I did this.
Well, bottom line, Russell, that's one of the reasons we're here on a Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
The military certainly be of great assistance to us, especially in relation to Miss Comeau's investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's certainly one of the things that went into our decision to give you a call at home today and see if we could deal with this today.
Okay.
So, okay.
Just a quick play-by-play of that exchange.
Can I assume you're going to be discreet?
A perfectly reasonable concern for anyone guilty or innocent in Williams' position to have, but also a query that relates to how authorities will be conducting their business. So just like at the very beginning, there's a fragile dynamic that needs to be maintained of Williams not feeling disrespected, while at the same time conveying that his preferences will not be informing the way this investigation is conducted in any way, shape or form. Smith first attempts to achieve this by again offering a response that addresses Williams' concerns, but with just the bare minimum of words and energy to qualify as polite.
It's possible, yeah.
But in this instance, that isn't quite enough for Williams to drop the subject.
Because, this would have a very significant impact on the base if they thought you thought I did this.
So Smith engages him a little more deeply, but only really on the level of word count. Note that everything Smith says in his 18-second response simply outlines the approach and actions both he and Williams already know have been taken. There are no assurances concerning what will or won't happen next. For instance, Smith doesn't make any promises that it won't be front-page news tomorrow that esteemed Colonel Russell Williams' house has been torn apart from top to bottom as part of a double murder investigation.
Well, bottom line, Russell, that's one of the reasons we're here on a Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
The military certainly be of great assistance to us, especially in relation to Miss Comeau's investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So That's certainly one of the things that went into our decision to give you a call at home today and see if we could deal with this today.
Okay.
So, okay.
It's tough to undo the rumor mill once it gets started.
That was a follow-up statement that anticipated some sort of engagement. Smith quite deftly chooses to treat it as Williams simply thinking aloud, meaning normal decorum doesn't necessitate a response, i.e. he ignores him.
But I appreciate that.
Okay.
While they wait for various results to come back, Smith turns the heat up a little without directly asking Williams if he is responsible for any of the crimes in question, explaining how microscopic amounts of DNA can yield a match, and asking if Williams had any occasion to be in any of the victims' homes for any reason. Williams remains firm that he did not, and then they get to the piece of evidence that landed him here. Williams has done a decent job of maintaining his composure up until this point. Though crossed arms are said by some to be indicative of defensiveness, you can, for want of a better phrase, give him credit for choosing a path and sticking to it, not showing much of a change in demeanour as Smith brings up what must be some pretty terrifying subjects. When he brings up the tyres on Williams' car, however, you can see a bit of squirming start to break through.
What kind of tires do you have on your Pathfinder?
I think they're Toyo.
Okay. Do you know the brand name, or sorry, the
I think
make?
I don't remember. Sorry, the make is Toyo.
Yeah.
I don't know the model.
Okay. Just see, I'll read this off to you, see if it rings a bell. Ever heard of, does Toyo Open Country HTS
That sounds
make any
right.
sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Smith discusses Williams' movements on and around key dates with him for a while, before circling back to the subject of the tyre treads.
Would it surprise you to know that when the CSI officers were looking around her property, that they identified a set of tire tracks to the north of her property? Looks as if the vehicle left the road and drove along the north tree line of Jessica Lloyd's property. Okay. They took, they examined those tire tracks, and they have contacts in the tire business. Obviously, tire tracks are a major source of evidence for us.
Sure.
They identified those tires as the same tires on your Pathfinder.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. One of the other things that they do to try and identify the type of vehicle that may have left those tires, well, is they do two things. They talk to witnesses. Okay. There was a female police officer that actually drove by that location that evening and recalls seeing an SUV type vehicle in the field up to the north of Jessica Lloyd's house, consistent with a Pathfinder.
Okay.
This is a very tragic story. A police officer on patrol in the area, who just so happened to know Jessica Lloyd, noticed Williams' Pathfinder parked in the field near her house and felt it was out of place. This was before Jessica had arrived home, and Williams was still outside lying in wait. The officer went to Jessica's door and knocked, but when there was no answer, and the officer couldn't detect any sort of disturbance, as there wasn't any at the time, she wrote it off and went on her way. If she had decided to investigate further by driving up to the SUV, Williams would certainly have at least been scared off, and perhaps even caught, depending on a number of variables. This isn't to criticize the officer though, as it was frankly a remarkable show of intuition to have suspected something amiss to begin with, based on something as commonplace as a truck parked in a snowy field.
What they also do to try and identify the type of the vehicle is they look at what they call the wheelbase width, okay? Because different vehicles, different makes, models have wheelbase width. So they can take those two sets of tire tracks, measure the distance between them, okay, and determine what the width is, and then they can enter that into a vehicle database, and it will spit out the types of vehicles, okay? Your Pathfinder's wheelbase width is very, very close to the width of the tires that were left in that field, okay? Do you have any recollection at all of being off that road?
I was not off the road, no.
Okay. All right. Russell, is there anything you can think of? Let's go talk about Marie-France Como for a minute, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any reason at all you can think of that during our investigation, obviously we're searching computers, things like Blackberries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Electronic devices, looking through houses for things that are in handwriting, written notes, diaries, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not at liberty to tell you what the content was, but is there any reason at all you can think of why Marie-France Como would have specifically referenced you in some of her writings?
Not at all.
No?
From everything that is publicly known about the case, there is in fact no reason for Marie-France Como to have written about Russell Williams, and no such writings have ever been disclosed. So this is in all likelihood a bluff. But Smith won't need many of those.
The problem is, Russell, is every time I walk out of this room, there's another issue that comes up, okay? And it's not issues that point away from you, it's issues that point at you, okay?
This is the first time that Smith has actually said point blank that there are factors pointing to Williams. Not in the sense that he may have known the victims more than he's letting on, or may have been in their house at some point, or parked on their property on the night of the crime, but that he is the person who murdered these women. As much as the first 3 accusations insinuate the last one, it's still a significant escalation to say so outright. Williams' response to this escalation is conspicuously muted. Not only will he not protest as Smith goes deeper into his grounds for suspicion, he will offer physical and verbal affirmations and lean in with intrigue.
And I want you to see what I mean, all right? This is the footwear impression of the person who approached the rear of Jessica Lloyd's house on the evening of the 28th and 29th of January.
Yeah.
Okay? Because essentially when you're dealing with footwear impressions, we have a gentleman on the OPP who's basically world-renowned. His name is John Norman. And essentially with footwear impressions, you're in a situation where you're pretty much in the area of fingerprints. Okay?
It's certainly an exaggeration to say that footwear impressions are in the same league as fingerprints in the main, though in the instance you are able to pull an impression clear enough to demonstrate unique marks of wear and tear, that would, as Smith says, essentially be the equivalent of pulling a clear fingerprint. Whether or not the prints in the snow were clear enough to draw that precise of a comparison, just the fact that it's the same make and size, coupled with the tyre tracks, is obviously going to be cause many times over for search warrants Williams knows will reveal video footage of him committing the crimes. So you can call this the moment that any scintilla of hope he may have had in his mind of buying himself time evaporates. And one of the things that makes this interrogation so fascinating is watching a subject of Williams' intelligence deal with this reality.
This is a photocopy of the boot that you took off your foot just a little while ago, okay? Now, I'm not an expert in footwear impressions, so I rely on the experts. You take a look at this print, and again, this is one print. This person walked through, there's several different prints to compare, so we're going to get features off of one print to compare, features off another print to compare. These are identical. Okay. Your vehicle drove up the side of Jessica Lloyd's house. Your boots walked to the back of Jessica Lloyd's house on the evening of the 28th and 29th of January. Okay, you want discretion. We need to have some honesty, okay?
There are some subtle things about Smith's choice of words and general framing of the situation worth making note of in the next 25 seconds.
Because this is getting out of control really fast, Russell. Okay, really, really fast. This is getting beyond my control.
This, being the situation, is getting beyond Smith's control. Whereas in fact the situation is actually as stable as it's ever been up until this point, now that the state has a dead-to-rights suspect. And consequently it is of course Williams who has lost whatever control he may have had in his mind over what direction this is all headed. It's an artful way of maintaining as much of an I'm in this with you dynamic as possible given the circumstances, which protects a level of rapport and trust, which in turn creates more fertile ground for disclosures or even an outright confession.
I came in here a few hours ago and I called you the way I called you today because I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I both know you were at Jessica Lloyd's house, and I need to know why.
I don't know what to say. It's,
Well, you need to explain it because
It looked as if Williams might have been about to come clean, which he may well have been. This is why Smith appropriately backed off and gave him space. The principle behind this is actually the same as a mantra in sales: shut up and close. The thinking goes that if a prospective buyer goes quiet, you shouldn't needle them with any more sales talking points, because you're liable to break a train of thought that may have been on track to a yes. If they come back with a no, then you can start trying to sell again. Once Williams' next sentence after the prolonged silence forms enough words to indicate he's going to keep trying to stall the inevitable, Smith cuts him off and moves to disclose more information that further emphasizes how doomed he is. He needs to keep Williams in a no-way-out headspace for as high a percentage of time as possible to create optimal conditions for a breakthrough.
this is the other problem we're having, Russell, okay? Again, these decisions are made by me. Right now, there's a search warrant being executed at your residence in Ottawa, okay? So your wife now knows what's going on. There's a search warrant being executed at your residence in Tweed, and your vehicle's been seized, okay? You and I both know they're going to find evidence that links you to these situations, okay? You and I both know that the unknown offender, male, on Marie Transcomo's body is going to be matched to you, quite possibly before the evening's over. Okay? This is a major investigation. The Center of Forensic Science is on call 24 hours a day helping us with this. Your opportunity to take some control here and to have some explanation that anybody is going to believe is quickly expiring. Okay? We're applying, the investigators now applying for a warrant to search your office. Right, these aren't decisions that we can say yes or no to. This is the practical steps in an investigation like this. And Russell,
when Smith notices Williams is going back into quiet mode, he opts not to finish the sentence he started, but after 15 seconds decides some further needling is warranted.
Russell, listen to me for a second, okay? When that evidence comes in, when that DNA match, when that phone rings and somebody knocks on this door, your credibility is gone. Okay, what are we going to do? You know there's only one option. What other option is there?
Again, asking Williams to articulate what choices he has other than to confess, rather than telling him he has none, is a very effective approach to conveying how hopeless his situation is.
What's the option?
Well, I don't think you want the cold-blooded psychopath option. I might be wrong. Okay, because don't get me wrong, I've met guys who actually kind of enjoyed the notoriety, got off on it, got off on having that label. Bernardo being one of them.
Smith is referencing Paul Bernardo, possibly Canada's most infamous serial killer and rapist, who, simply as a point of trivia, just so happened to study economics at the University of Toronto Scarborough at the same time as Russell Williams, though 1 year behind. There's no reason to believe there was ever any connection between the two, however. Appealing to someone's self-concept, and how their approach is liable to affect their perception in the eyes of friends, colleagues, and the wider public, is a common interrogation tactic, though it's a particularly appropriate one to pull out when dealing with a subject like Williams, whose reputation as an honourable and exemplary military man has defined so much of his adult life.
I don't see that in you. If I saw that in you, I wouldn't be back in here talking to you, quite frankly.
For about 2 minutes, Williams sits in silence, with Smith occasionally reiterating his lack of options in slightly different ways.
Russell, what are we going to do?
Call me Russ, please.
Okay.
A small gesture, indicating Smith's moves to establish the least adversarial dynamic possible, have been effective. In fact, Williams will request to speak with Smith for all interviews going forward, even after his imprisonment, and you'll note Smith never calls Russell Williams by his full first name again after he makes the request.
What are we going to do, Russ? Is Jessica somewhere we can find her easily? Like, is this something where I can make a call and tell somebody to go to a location and they're going to find her, or is this something where we have to go and take a walk? Russ, maybe this would help. Can you tell me what the issue is you're struggling with?
It's hard to believe this is happening.
Why is that? Is there something missing that you're struggling with that I can shed some light on for you?
I'm struggling with how upset my wife is right now.
Russ, what are you looking for?
I'm concerned that they're tearing apart my wife's brand new house.
So am I. But if nobody tells them what's there and what's not, they don't have any choice. Computers will be brought to Microsoft in California. They'll be picked apart. You can't erase things from computers.
You can, with enough technical know-how, though it is very difficult, which is why criminals often seek outside help or just opt for complete physical destruction of devices to be extra safe. That's completely irrelevant in this case, though. With Williams being the data hoarder he is, no forensic software will be required to incriminate him.
I put my best foot forward here for you, but I really have. I don't know what else to do to make you understand the impact of what's happening here. Did we talk?
I want to minimize the impact on my wife.
So do I.
So how do we do that?
Well, we start by telling the truth.
Okay.
Okay. So where is she?
Get a map.
And there you have it. About 4 hours and 42 minutes after entering the room as a respected colonel claiming to have nothing to hide, Russell Williams has just indicated he's ready to make a full confession.
Is she close to where she lives? I've got maps of that general area. Which town is she near? Why don't we start there?
I'm not sure if you give me a map of covers Calabar down to the highway and over to Tweed and south. I'll show you.
Smith arranges to find a more detailed map, and Williams discloses where in his property key pieces of evidence can be found.
I'll tell you where the emergency cards are.
Where are they?
They're in the house there, but
In Ottawa?
yeah.
Whereabouts?
Some in the camera bag, which they would have found in my office.
Mm-hmm.
And when you walk into the office on the left side, there's a desk of drawers, set of drawers, like a filing cabinet, wooden, IKEA. In one of the top 2 drawers, and there's a plastic divider.
Yeah.
And there's inside there are 2 memory cards,
Okay.
which are blank, but I'm sure they can be
And whose images are on those cards?
well, I've erased them, but I expect you'll be able to draw images of Jessica and I.
What about Marie?
There may be images on there as well.
And the 2 women from September?
Yep.
Okay. Do you have those images stored anywhere else?
Yeah, there are 2 hard drives in the house in Ottawa. I can draw you a little picture if you like.
Sure. Do you want to do that now while I'm
Sure.
getting them out? Okay.
Then, after retrieving a map and getting a specific location for Jessica Lloyd's body, it's time to gather more information as to how exactly Williams' crimes transpired.
What do you want to talk about?
Because it's pretty wide open now, eh?
Yeah.
What do you want to know?
Well, do you want to work forwards or backwards?
Doesn't matter.
Why don't we start with Jessica? How does that start for you?
I saw her in her house on her treadmill.
Another thing Russell Williams' interrogation is infamous for is the chilling level of detail he goes into in an almost business-like fashion about the horrific acts he perpetrated, some of which you'll hear in a moment. We pause here to note, however, that Williams is not so much an exceptionally honest serial killer as he is an exceptionally pragmatic one. He's confessing to the murders and assaults because he's come to realize it's not possible to avoid being implicated in them. As to the grisly details he'll disclose, those too are unconcealable because he filmed just about all of it. But he will still lie to try to cast himself in a better light when he thinks that he can. And what he just said about first spotting Jessica on her treadmill as he drove past her house is an example of this. The treadmill was situated near an above-ground basement window, at least 50 yards from the road that Williams drove to and from work on, so it's highly implausible he just happened to see her there while driving past one day. It's much more likely, and in keeping with his MO, that he first saw her under different circumstances and then began stalking her for a period of time, which some might see as more sinister than spotting her once and then being overtaken by an irrepressible urge, even though the wickedness of what he did to Jessica is the same.
So I woke her up. Didn't hit her. She only hit her once. Friday night.
That is true. One thing of note that will explain the importance of in the final section of this video is the non-sexual physical violence Williams visited upon his victims was consistently just enough to achieve his ends. No overkill, though there's a bit of a qualifier to put on that when it comes to Marie-France Como, which we'll explain momentarily.
Well, so I raped her in her house. And then I took her to the car and took her to Tweed. Spent the day in Tweed. And then I hit her as we were walking. She thought we were leaving. back of the head.
What did the hit on the back of the head do?
Well, I was surprised that her skull gave way. She was there and immediately unconscious. I strangled her.
Okay. What did you hit her with?
Flashlight.
Okay. In the house or outside the house?
In the house.
God knows what Detective Jim Smith is actually thinking and feeling right now. Enough time working as the head of a major crimes unit is sure to build a pretty strong stomach. But in any event, he needs to maintain as much of a neutral and non-judgmental stance as possible, as any outward displays of disgust may inhibit further disclosures.
Okay. Marie-France Como.
There was an open window in the basement of her house when she was away. I went in there a couple of nights before she came home. Looked around. I went back in there late at night when she was at home. She was on the phone in her bedroom. She actually discovered me in the basement. She was trying to get her cat to come upstairs, and the cat was in the basement, had seen me and was fixated on me in the corner. She couldn't get the cat up, so she came downstairs to try and get the cat, and weren't sure why she came over to me. I guess the cat was staring at me, and she was wondering what the cat was staring at. So when she spotted me, I had the same flashlight. I subdued her.
How did you subdue her? And when you say subdued her in the basement, what did you do?
She saw me right away, so I was just hit her a couple of times and around her head, try and knock her out. Didn't, but she was bleeding a little bit. Eventually, after a struggle, subdued her.
Marie-France Como was treated with more brutality and cruelty than any of William's other victims, most likely on account of courageously putting up a struggle. Where Williams is documented loosening bindings when victims complained they were causing pain, Marie's complaints to this effect were totally ignored. At one point in the video he recorded of the incident, she can reportedly be heard pleading that she does not want to die after Williams whispers something in her ear, implying he is taunting her. This is in stark contrast to his other victims, including Jessica Lloyd, who he repeatedly assured would live.
Did she recognize you?
No, I had stuff on my face.
So you go upstairs, and you said she suffocated?
Well, I suffocated her. I put tape on her. I put tape on her mouth, and then I put tape on her nose and held it there so she couldn't breathe.
Did you take anything out of Marie-France's house or Jessica Lloyd's house?
Yeah, some of their underwear.
Okay.
That's all.
And where is that?
It's in some boxes in the basement here in Ottawa, in that rec room.
How much underwear is in those boxes?
In the coming seconds, you're going to see Williams exhibit the classic mannerisms of a person who knows they have to admit something, but can't quite bear to say it aloud. Less because it's evil, and more because it's humiliating.
Probably 60 pieces or so total.
All women's?
The word total implies all in all, final count, which Williams quickly realizes does not make his answer of probably 60 pieces or so a truthful reply to the question how much underwear is in those boxes. So he amends his answer.
Yeah, 60 pieces of theirs.
Of whose?
Of Jessica's and Marie-France.
So you took 60 pieces from between the two of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Even Detective Smith, in his line of work, having spent this amount of time listening to Russell Williams recount these sorts of activities, is visibly taken aback by the disclosure that Williams collected approximately 60 pieces of underwear between just 2 victims. But that doesn't even scrape the surface of how astonishing the insatiability of his fetish has gotten by this point. Which is why Williams is being coy around the question of how much missing underwear he's truly going to be found to be accountable for. Over the course of his criminal career, he stole, at bare minimum, 1,400 pieces. On more than one occasion, he had to burn piles of them due to literally running out of physical space in his house to store his spoils where his wife wouldn't find them.
Why do you think these things happen? Have you spent much time thinking about that?
About why?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know the answers. And I'm pretty sure the answers don't matter.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you like or dislike these women?
I didn't know any of them.
Okay.
I had met Marie-France that one time in our airplane.
Okay. No, I guess when you're going through these things, are you well, let's talk about Jessica, because she was there with you for the whole day, right? Mm-hmm. What kind of feelings were you experiencing while you were with her that day?
Oh, she was a very nice girl.
Williams seems to exhibit in this moment, as he has in previous moments, something that is not at all common among serial killers. Genuine shame. Not just stemming from his loss of standing, but what he actually did to Jessica and his other victims. You may disagree with this analysis, and you have perfectly good reasons to. But several people who have studied this case and/or had the opportunity to see Williams in person have drawn the same conclusion. We'll discuss the significance of that contention in the final section of this video.
Can you tell me why you killed her? Right? Do you know why you killed her?
Well, I think I killed her because I knew that her story would be recognized.
Her story would be recognized? How do you mean?
Well, because she knew I was taking pictures. So because of the two stories in Tweed, that would have been quite obvious.
Maybe the rationale behind murdering Lloyd that Williams is stating is truthful, but it doesn't logically make a lot of sense. To recap, he's saying the woman he assaulted in his home neighbourhood of Tweed lived to tell the tale of a man who bound, assaulted, and most importantly in his mind, took pictures of them. If Jessica Lloyd, and presumably Marie-France Como, who lived further away from his home and closer to the military base, had the same story, the risk of the assaults leading back to him would dramatically increase. But that just isn't true. If the incidents in Tweed and those closer to the military base are connected, then it is true that a geographical link to Williams becomes more stark. But that's it, which is hardly going to be enough to put an esteemed colonel with no criminal record under the microscope, as we see demonstrated by the fact that the crimes were suspected as very likely being connected anyway, due to their inherent abnormality in the area outside of the photography aspect, and this never caused Williams to come under suspicion until his tyres were matched to the treads found on Jessica Lloyd's property. An alternative explanation is that Williams incorporating murder into his MO was in a sense accidental. He may have had no intention of killing Marie-France Como when he broke into her house, but wound up deciding to do so after things didn't go according to plan, and he felt like she may have gotten too good a look at him, was enraged by the fight she put up, or a mixture of both. After doing so, he got an additional rush from the murder and getting away with it, which in turn raised the bar for what he needed to get his fix. This theory is, of course, impossible to prove. Williams discusses what he did to Jessica in rather harrowing detail, most of which will spare you. But there is one moment he discusses toward the end of the ordeal we want to pick up on.
She had a seizure, actually. She felt it coming on, and because she'd had some before, probably went on for about 15 minutes. Sort of it.
So, how do you know she had them before?
She told me.
Jessica Lloyd was in all likelihood faking the seizure as a ploy to end what by that point had been just about a full day-long assault. Williams was filming during the moment, and in the tape she can reportedly be heard saying that he needs to drop her off at the hospital because she only has 20 minutes from the time it starts. Yet her family has indicated she had no history of seizures. Williams is said to appear to attempt to comfort her during this episode, telling her she'll get through this and the like. And such totally incongruous gestures of kindness are not out of the ordinary in his MO, with the exception of Marie-France Como. In the instance of Jane Doe, she reports that after she told him he didn't seem like the sort of person who would do these things, his demeanour seemed to become somewhat kinder, notwithstanding the circumstances. He also made a point of reassuring her baby would not be harmed. In the case of Laurie Massicott, he even fetched her an aspirin at one point after she complained of head pain. None of this is to try to make the case that Williams is actually not that bad a guy, of course. But again, it should be noted that such behaviour is highly atypical among serial killers. They may well express false gestures of caring and concern to achieve their ends, but very rarely after they have gained full control, as Williams had in all aforementioned examples.
Then I got her dressed because she thought she was leaving. And then as we were walking out, I struck her on the back of the head. She was immediately unconscious. And then I strangled her.
And from there, Russell Williams essentially volunteered for a fast track to life in prison, assisting authorities in locating Jessica Lloyd's body, further incriminating evidence on his hard drives, and pleading guilty to a total of 88 criminal charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 2 concurrent life sentences, and while Canada's criminal code dictates he must be eligible for parole after 25 years, there is absolutely no reason to believe it will ever actually be granted. But while the criminal case of Russell Williams is about as definitively closed as it can be, his psychological profile remains frustratingly ambiguous. This video has made references to Williams being, in many ways, an atypical serial killer. And in closing, we want to flesh out how that's so in a little more detail. Very briefly, because there isn't much more to say beyond just pointing it out, first acting on deviant impulses at the age of 44 is extremely rare. Williams has estimated his obsession with women's underwear went back to his late 20s or early 30s, but he was able to keep it under control until 2007. As to a potential triggering event that might have pushed him over the edge, he claims to not be able to think of one, and the best explanations others have been able to posit are festering resentment over a rejection from his college years, struggles with arthritic pain, and grief over the death of his 18-year-old cat, Curio, which happened well after his first break-in anyway. So in other words, no decent explanation whatsoever. When it comes to defining the type of serial killer Williams is, it's not as if his behaviour defies all categorization, or fails to tick any boxes on a checklist of serial killer 101s. On the severe sexual sadism scale, one of the most contemporary evaluation methods for diagnosing sexual sadists, Williams scores a 6, with only a 4 being required to qualify. A quick note on the scale for those of you paying attention to the individual criterion. you might notice that both torture of the victim and excessive physical violence are crossed, which could be perplexing given some of the details we've been over, as Williams' violence was clearly excessive relative to anything like normal behaviour, and what his victims went through could safely be described as torture. But in this context, all of the descriptions are relative to someone who is already a violent sexual offender, not all of whom are necessarily sadists. Excessive then means excessive relative to what is required to achieve the offender's ends. Same goes for torture. As mentioned during the interrogation analysis, the physical and psychological cruelty that Marie-France Como was subjected to did exceed what was required to achieve Russell Williams' ends. However, because that behaviour was so anomalous to Williams' other assaults, it can be reasonably inferred that it stemmed from rage at Marie-France's resistance, rather than gratification from the violence itself, making the behaviour more of an extension of the second criterion, rather than a qualifier for the third or seventh. In any event, Russell Williams is a sexual sadist. With that established, let's move on to what he is not. In the opinion of several professionals who have evaluated him, including his own forensic psychiatrist, he is not a psychopath. There are numerous reasons various journalists, academics, and forensic professionals have put forward as to why that label is inappropriate. To boil it down as simply as possible, he does not seem to have a severely impaired sense of empathy or conscience. He exhibited what appeared to be genuine warmth and consideration in his personal relationships. The number one concern he cites in his interrogation of not wanting his crimes to unnecessarily burden his wife appears totally sincere and isn't in keeping with a psychopath, who will typically be the centre of their own concern when the chips are down. In terms of demonstrating empathy in relation to the crimes themselves, we know that both victims he allowed to live reported this rather bizarre dynamic where he seemed to want to comfort them, even as he brutally violated them. It can't be ruled out that this was just the approach he thought was best to minimize the chances of them fighting back or screaming out, of course, but you should put some stock in what they perceived. Like Jane Doe noting that his demeanour seemed to become kinder after she appealed to his sense of character. It would be very unusual for a psychopath to care about living up to such a perception, especially in a circumstance where they're anonymous. As to after he was caught, well, as ill-advised as it may be to take a serial killer at his word, the apology he offered at his sentencing reads as genuine shame. And while it should be noted that friends and family in attendance were in no way moved by it, the presiding judge believed it to be sincere, even while still referring to Williams as a sick and dangerous man whose depths of depravity knew no equal. However, if you still have doubts as to the sincerity of Russell Williams' remorse, it can't be said that you don't have cause, because there does seem to be an inescapable contradiction at the heart of the proposition. How can someone capable of feeling remorse over such crimes also be capable of carrying those crimes out and enjoying it in the first place? We have absolutely no answer to that question. There is, at very least, good reason to hope his remorse is genuine. Not in the sense that it might allow us to view Russell Williams as an ever so marginally better human being, but that it creates a final picture of this case that most closely approximates what one could call true justice. There is no reversing what Russell Williams did. There is no bringing Marie-France Como and Jessica Lloyd back to life. And there is no death penalty in Canada. So Williams is now housed in a maximum security prison. And because the nature of his crimes and his background would make him unsafe among the prison's general population, he is kept in isolation, receiving meals through a slit in the door of his cell and having little to no contact with the other high-risk prisoners on his block. The half an hour a day he's given to exercise in a small, walled-off yard alone is the closest thing he has to recreational activities. Outside of that, just about the rest of the entirety of Russell Williams' existence will be spent sitting in his cell, alone with his thoughts. If he really does have a conscience, as some claim, then that time, with those thoughts, it could be argued, is a fate worse than death.